What's going on, everybody? This is Bunjivin Bakcho. I bring you another F1 2020 video. Today, continuing our Road to 110 series, or as I like to call it, Chasing Mediocrity. And on screen, just putting up the assists and gameplay settings just to show that I am racing at 105 without any assists. So really the key to a race like Singapore is track position. So at the start, really want to get out in front of as many cars as possible. So Leclerc had a pretty bad start there. Wasn't too difficult to outdrag Verstappen from the start, and really this is the most important part, is getting behind Hamilton and using him as a measuring stick. So like I said, track position is key to this track, so overtaking will be very difficult. What you really want to do when you are in a situation like this, say you're in P2 and there's somebody out in front of you that you're either clearly faster than or you have a similar pace to, and you'll eventually see that Hamilton is actually kind of holding us up on track. It'll be a little bit more clear once we get past lap 2 and he kind of turns down his engine. But in that case, I would recommend just sticking behind him, staying out of trouble, waiting for him to pit, and then just go long on your first stint and try to pull a gap. A big enough gap that they can't really come back once you pit for your second set of tires. Otherwise, if you have similar pace, I would probably recommend pitting early. So if you're within a second, like I am on screen right now, and you know that you can't overtake on track, the guy in front is driving really well, not really making any mistakes or anything like that, and you find that you're just kind of keeping up with him, but you don't really have too many opportunities to really overtake, then yeah, I would recommend going for an undercut, saving up as much ERS as possible, maybe trying to burn as much fuel as you can without going to the negatives or putting yourself into a spot of trouble for the rest of the race. And then just pitting early and gunning it, and trying to go for a quality lap while they're in the pit lane. But as you can see, Hamilton's not really that much quicker than us. It's even on lap 2 when he's got his engine still turned up. It's not difficult to stay within a half a second of Hamilton here. So I am planning on just waiting for him to pit and then turning everything up and having a really fast in lap, or maybe even extending my first stint to create a large gap that he can't recover from. So I do apologize that the Singapore portion is going to be really short, but I'm sure any of you guys that have raced at Singapore already know that this is not the most exciting track ever. Very processional, pretty much like Hungary and Monaco. Just because the track is so narrow, and the straights, even though there is one really long straight, the section preceding it kind of doesn't allow for you to stick too close to the person in front, and it's really difficult, even with the assist of DRS and overtake, to really get out in front. But luckily for us, or you guys and myself, really didn't have to wait too long to see any action here. 105 difficulty used to give me a lot of problems with the AI, but once I kind of got used to how the AI guys race, it's really not that difficult. As you can see, he makes a mistake there going into turn 1. So I feel like as long as I stick to within a half a second, usually that will be enough to keep the AI close to you, just because they're going to be making mistakes on track. So here is our first attempt, and really not even that difficult. I don't think there was any contact there. Just kind of braked a little bit later than Hamilton and took the inside line. Why he didn't defend there, I don't know, but rest assured this is at 105 difficulty, and really that's about it, guys. Once that kind of happens, get out in front, pull away a little bit, wait for everybody to pit, and then I jump into the pit lane myself to change out for my second set of tires, and it's pretty much done from there. So just kind of skipping ahead to where we do finally box for our second set of tires. As you can see, Stroll is about 16 seconds behind us. Hamilton's not even on the timing charts. On the minimap, it looks like he's stuck behind Verstappen there. I do have to work on a huge weakness of mine, which is pit entry and pit exit, especially at tracks where the entry and exit comes right after a turn, or there's a turn into the pit lane, kind of like here, or like Coda, where you kind of have to hit a turn coming into the pit lane. And on exit like this here at Brazil, where you have to take that sharp left turn right after the pit lane, or even like a pit lane like Azerbaijan, another left turn right at the pit exit. But we handled it well enough, and there was a large enough gap behind us that it wasn't too much of an issue. I don't think Raikkonen's pitted yet, and he's holding up the only two guys that are really any kind of concern to us, Verstappen and Hamilton. And then on the minimap, there is a huge gap between Hamilton and the Ferraris. So not too difficult of a race, pretty easy. I do find it kind of weird that tracks that I used to have issues with back when I was using the racing line, it seems like they're easier for me now that I've turned off the racing line and decided to try and learn these tracks. So the easy tracks that I used to think were easy, like Silverstone and Spa-Francorchamps, those tracks are a little bit more difficult, and I think it's just because I got so used to the racing line that now that I turned it off, it's a little bit it's a little more difficult to kind of figure those tracks out without that crutch of a racing line. But I am working on it. Still having difficulty at those tracks at 105, but I think I just need a little bit more time to adapt to racing without the racing line. So yeah, pit stops are all made. Well, not all of them. Magnussen's about to jump in, and I think Raikkonen's about to jump in here as well. But we have a almost 5-second gap to Verstappen and Hamilton. So this race is pretty much over so long as we don't make any huge mistakes. And here we are, just jumping to the end of lap 14, starting our final lap at Singapore. And we have a 13-second gap to P2 and P3 here after starting on the second row of the grid. So yeah, Singapore is actually becoming one of my favorite tracks. The one weird thing is, for some reason when I race in Grand Prix mode, I feel like I have very good control of the car. And then when I jump online to do an online race, even with the racing line, it feels like, I don't know if maybe it's just nerves or something like that, but it feels like the car is a little trickier to handle. Back end's a little bit more twitchy, can't seem to get decent traction out of traction zones. But like I said, I think that has more to do with nerves and just competing against other human drivers. Unless there is a huge difference in the way the cars handle online and offline, but I'm not quite sure. I think it might just be in my head, but offline we seem to be doing pretty well. I did attempt this at 110, and half the time I did okay, and the other half I didn't. When you're racing at 110, you really have to you have to have such consistent laps that it's difficult for somebody like me. I'm just not quite there yet. It still makes small mistakes here and there, and it's just kind of difficult to keep up with the AI. But at 105, the AI makes enough mistakes that it's not too difficult to keep up with. And as you can see here, we come home 14 seconds ahead of Verstappen and Hamilton, and we take the victory. So yeah, kind of a short race, but it's just kind of the way Singapore is. Really not too much action on track, especially if you're starting towards the front of the grid. But we do take the victory, and we can scratch this one off the list. So we will jump into the second race.
Yes, another historic win under their belts. Well done to the team at Mercedes.
Alright, so because the Singapore race was kind of boring and really only one overtake on our part, I decided to start a little bit more towards the back for the Mexico race here. I did think about just starting last, but what's the point? I know I'm going to get by the back markers and some of the back midfield cars anyway, so I just decided to start in P14. Well, I didn't decide to start at P14. I kind of just stopped at the finish line during quali, and I ended up ending up in P14. So again, just putting up the settings and assists menus just to show that I am racing at 105 without any assists. Starting P14 here. Mexico didn't used to be a really strong track for me, but again, I think because I didn't do too many races here with the racing line assist on, once I turned it off, it was easier to pick up than certain other tracks that I used to love racing at quite a lot. So right away, getting up to P9 already, and pretty easily getting around Albin and Sainz battling behind us there. So P7 after the first few turns on lap 1, and I'm pretty confident at this point just because Mexico's one of my stronger tracks without the racing line assist. But I do have to be careful. As you can see, there's a few pairs of cars battling out in front of us, and you'll see it. I do kind of have to force myself to start going a little bit slower than I want to, allowing Verstappen and Hamilton to kind of pull away out front. But because I was pretty confident on this track, I think so long as they're not pulling out like a 9 or 10 second gap, it shouldn't be too difficult to catch back up to them. And Stroll and Ricardo here slow each other down enough to the point that I can get out in front of them. But I do end up using all of my ERS before we get back to the finish line here, which I'm not too fond of. I try to save as much ERS as I can on the first lap. In general, when you're racing in public lobbies, most guys kind of blow through all of their ERS in the first 2 or 3 laps, and it's just really easy to overtake them. So I tend to try and save as much ERS as possible. And sometimes I even have to put my fuel mix down to lean in public lobbies just to stay out of trouble and kind of gauge how my opponents are driving. So not too difficult to get by Leclerc here. Ferrari doesn't have too much straight line speed, and I'm really great through the corners, so pretty easily just outbraking him and then taking a tighter turn through those corners there. Perez is a little bit quicker on this in the straight line department, but again at 105 the AI isn't too difficult. The racing points aren't too difficult to get by, but Verstappen and Hamilton are now about 5 or 6 seconds out in front. So I want to get by Perez here as quick as possible and start chasing down the 2 leaders. I do think about diving in here, but the AI loves to turn in on me at that corner specifically. So I think better of it, just sit behind him and wait for DRS to overtake him unless another opportunity arises.
Okay, DRS is now available. Some information on Latifi, they are out of the race.
And one of the good things about Mexico is that there are 3 DRS zones, and the first 2 are pretty easy to overtake at, and the third one through the S's in Sector 2, as long as you have a pretty good line and the driver in front isn't too much quicker than you, it's pretty easy to overtake. So now, as you can see, because we are so close to Perez, he is starting to make mistakes, locking up through that corner there, and just kind of making it even more easy for us to follow behind him. So I do think about a possible overtake here. He is not that far in front of us. We get a pretty good S section through there, and yeah, I'm just gonna go for it here. Even at 105, it's easy to outbrake the AI drivers, so that wasn't too difficult. I did think about maybe just saving it for the main straight, the 2 consecutive DRS zones, but because Hamilton was almost 7 seconds in front of me, just wanted to get by Perez as quick as possible. Wasn't sure if he's going to make some mistake through that final corner, and then I just kind of losing more time. So yeah, pretty easy to get out in front of the slower drivers there, and then it's just a matter of chasing down the 2 leaders at this point. And it really doesn't take long. I think just about 2 laps there, we got out in front of Perez at the start of lap 4, I think it was. And this is the end of lap 6, going on to lap 7. And we are barely missing out on DRS to Verstappen by about a tenth or so. As you can see, we actually dip under a second there out of that final corner, but closing in a 3 seconds in 3 laps is pretty decent at 105, and because it wasn't too difficult, it's probably not going to be that difficult to catch up to Hamilton as well and overtake him. So Mexico is a really good track to overtake at. I mean, not through the corners or anything like that, but obviously the start-finish straight is so long that once you get into DRS, it's really easy. And if you can't overtake on the start-finish straight, then the second straight after turn 3 is also long enough to where if you can get a good enough exit out of turn 3, you should still be able to overtake on the second straight there too. We do get DRS off of Verstappen through this S section here, but I decide not to use any ERS. I'm just going to use this DRS zone to kind of close up on him and then use the super long start finish straight to overtake, make it a little bit easier. We can also build a little bit of a gap and don't give him a chance to come back and overtake us. So pretty good exit there on the final corner, and now it's just a matter of time really before we get out in front. I decided not to use any ERS just because we were so close to him anyway, and DRS was giving enough overspeed for us to overtake there. So I'll just save the ERS for the second straight here and close in on Hamilton a little bit more. So it doesn't really take too long to close up to Hamilton. This is just later on in lap 8. And we were about a second and a half or so behind him, but Hamilton jumps into the pit, which is kind of odd. Usually when I play as Valtteri in the second Mercedes, I always get pitted first, but at this race, for some reason, Hamilton jumped in the pit lane first. So now my plan to undercut is kind of foiled. So really just trying to get a really good in-lap for my pit stop and close the gap as much as possible, prevent him from getting too good of an undercut on me, and hopefully we can chase him down on our second stint. So here we are at the end of that lap. Pretty decent pit entry. I didn't get a penalty at least. Like I said, I really need to work on my pit entries and exits, but that one wasn't too bad. So you can barely see it on the mini-map, but Hamilton's stuck behind a McLaren right now, which is good for us, but not so good for us as well. The McLaren of Sainz held him up a little bit, but now that he was behind the McLaren, he gets DRS, so it'll be another lap or so before we can catch up to him. We don't have DRS ourselves coming out of the pit lane there because we were P1 when we went in. But yeah, we had a decent enough in-lap that Hamilton didn't get to build too much of a gap to us. Still not within DRS, but judging by our pace on our first stint, it shouldn't be too difficult. Hamilton has a moment there. Kind of gives us a chance to kind of pull in a little bit closer now, and hopefully we'll get DRS coming into the next DRS zone here to close that gap a little bit more and make our job a little bit easier on the start-finish straight. But as you can see, we don't really have much luck as we miss out on DRS again by just a few tenths. We are under 1 second now, so I'm hoping to get DRS on the start-finish straight. We are under 1 second at this moment, but this left-hand turn always gives me problems. Can't get on the traction quick enough, and we miss it again by less than a tenth. So now we're going to have to either hope that he makes a mistake on the following lap, or just hope that we can draw in close enough that we can get DRS on the next lap. So it's taken us a little bit longer than I expected. Couldn't close in on him during lap 11 there, and it's taken us till the end of lap 12 here to really close this gap, but we finally get a pretty decent final sector there, and we are just about a half a second behind Hamilton. 50% ERS left, plenty of fuel, and we have DRS, so again, this shouldn't be too much of an issue. Turn on overtake. Boy, overtake really drains ERS. But we get enough overspeed again, just like Verstappen here, to get out in front of Hamilton. We get another bite of the cherry for the second straight here. and we can use this DRS zone to build that gap even more. And again, once you get out in front of the AI, or at least at 105 anyway, so long as you're driving pretty consistently and not making too many mistakes, I don't know if it's just the dirty air or if it's because they're programmed this way, but once you get out in front, it's quite easy to build a gap. I feel like it's easier to stay out in front than it is to chase them down. But whatever, it works out for us anyway. So yeah, by the time we get through the S section here, we're already at about 7/10 ahead, and the gap is building even more. And I think once we get out of the sector 3 here and get back on the start finish straight, we're already wow, okay, before we even get to start finish straight, we're already a second ahead of Hamilton. And at this point, start of lap 14, because we had so much pace on Hamilton, and now that we're a second ahead and he's outside of our DRS zone, this race is pretty much over and we can count it as a win. So skipping to the end of lap 17 and the start of our final lap, and the gap to Hamilton is just about 5.5 seconds. At some point, the lap before, Verstappen ran into some issues, and you can see he's parked right in the middle of sector 1 there, causing the yellow flag, and he was pretty much not a threat for the entire race once we got out in front of him anyway. So yeah, Mexico can be crossed off the list now. I think this will be episode, I don't know what episode this is, but I'll make a list at the end of the video to kind of check off the tracks that we've done races at already at 105 without the racing line. I actually really enjoyed the Mexico track now. I didn't used to like it before, but now that it's one of my stronger tracks without the racing line, I very much enjoy it. Probably one of my more consistent tracks. I can usually get a pretty decent lap for the majority of the laps during a 25% race. So yeah, it's probably one of my stronger tracks now. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Road to 110. I know it's kind of weird I'm releasing this so soon after the previous video. Usually it's like a week or two between videos, but I'm on vacation this week and I really had nothing to do. So yeah, we get the win, and this is a pretty fun race. So thank you guys for checking this video out. I hope you learned a thing or two that'll help you in your practices and races. Stay tuned for more videos. If you think I deserve it, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm just going to throw up a chart right now of the races that we've done already, and we can take off our list.
How do you think they were able to deliver such an incredible result today?
Well, I think it was clear what the main contributing factor out on the track was today: speed. I know it sounds like an obvious thing to say, Crofty, but fast cars win races, and we saw that today with our winner.
And I could see the drivers starting to approach the podium for the victory celebrations. A real team victory.